All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the first Screencastify video of our lecture notes for the next week and a half while Miss Bolden, myself, hello, is out for surgery slash recovering. So with that, let's get into our first topic slash unit of this playlist. That is going to be Unit 6, Consequences of Industrialization. We are still in the same time period of 1750 to 1900. In today's Screencastify, we will be going over topics 6.1 through 6.3, in addition to 6.6 and 6.8 on imperialism and colonialism. We'll also be talking about migration during this time period as well. So let's get started. Starting with homework and reminders. First on the homework list is going to be working conditions, that reading, that is a primary source. Then you had questions to respond to after you were done reading it. That was due this past week. Make sure that you get that in. That is going to be a separate assignment from Unit 6/7 playlist in terms of that being a mastery assignment. This working conditions reading in question is not going to be counted a part of the mastery assignment. It is going to be its separate own learning assignment. So with that, our second point is your Unit 6 playlist. That is due May 16th. That includes the virtual items, so the Google Forms needing to be complete, as well as the guided notes. I will collect all guided notes May 16th to ensure that completion and work was getting done actually during the time that I was out. And with that too, you do have an opportunity to do missing work that are learning assignments. If you would like to, there is a little bin full of work from this past quarter that you can take a look at, take, and turn in. If you are turning in missing work, I ask that you turn it in the missing work, or not with missing work, the absent work tray. Make sure that you put your name and class period on it. That's all that I ask. Alrighty, let's get started. Once again, this is a lecture. So with the lectures that we do in class, you know whatever is underlined, you are going to be filling into the blanks of your Cornell sheets. With these videos, I know that it is going to be a little different from how we typically do guided notes in class. You have more time to write and really comprehend the notes. So I encourage you to take a pause whenever you need, take a pause whenever you have to write something down, so that you truly do listen and comprehend this lecture, which was only going to help aid you in acing this AP exam, which is coming up very, 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 very soon. Alrighty, let's get started. And that is with our objective and essential question. Your objective is that students will be able to identify the causes of imperialism and explain the significance of the effects of imperialism from 1750 to 1900 by completing guided notes. That is what we are doing as of right now. And then our essential question is, what were the causes of imperialism and how impactful was imperialism in the period 1750 to 1900? I also just want to apologize in advance. I know my voice sounds awful. I am sick right now. That is the reason why I'm getting surgery in the first place, because I keep getting sick. So I just wanted to get that out the way. I apologize for how I'm sounding right now. Alrighty, let's get started with our actual notes, starting with a definition of imperialism. So that is the development of a system of global European colonies and colonialization of Africa, the Americas, and Asia after industrialization for political and economic gain in the 1800s. So with that, how I would summarize that definition is that imperialism is the system of European countries establishing colonies in Africa, the America, and Asia after the period of the Industrial Revolution, but still in the 1800s. So with that, let's go over causes of imperialism. First, starting with nationalism. We've talked about this before. This is the extreme pride in one's country. It's a little different from patriotism in that it is way more extreme and typically deals with more similarities based on ethnicity and race rather than language, which of course language is still a component to nationalism, but I would say ethnicity and race really play a big role in nationalism as well. So with nationalism will cause an increase in competition between industrial powers. Now, we're specifically talking about European powers here, but this will also be the case for the United States and Japan once they start to become industrialized powers during this period, which we will see. The economic motives of imperialism we will cover here, and we will also cover in the lecture for 6.4/6.5. That is going to be overall the need for raw materials for the industrial economies. With the Columbian Exchange, it opened the world up to the Americas and Africa, to all of the abundant resources that they had. And so because of that, and in conjunction with the Industrial Revolution that occurs, the Industrial Revolution needs those raw materials to then transform into manufactured goods through the usage of machines. So that's why that is an economic motive. On top of that, there is overall just the desire for new markets to sell these manufactured goods. So with these European companies making manufactured goods, that's all great and all because they have these raw materials. They still need people to sell them to. So with imperialism, it kind of gives you a guaranteed market to sell your manufactured goods in. And then very lastly, a motive for European industrial powers is that they are going to want less reliance and more independence from the Americas. That's because the Americas at this time are starting to get more power, both economic and political power, because there is, once again, a lot of natural resources in the Americas. So there's just a lot coming out of there in terms of trade, and also in terms of politics. There is a lot going on of state expansion in the Americas. And then lastly, for causes is going to be cultural motives. The first one being social Darwinism. This comes from the distorted, which means kind of changed theory of Darwinism, which comes from biology, the idea of evolution coming from Charles Darwin. So people are going to take this and create it into a social theory that is a racist theory, a racist belief of European superiority based on I'm putting in air quotes, facts that are scientific. They aren't scientific. They are not backed by science at all. It's a lot of pseudoscience. And so with that, it is used to justify imperial control of Africa and Asia through white people taking care of these populations of Africans and of Asians and of indigenous groups in the Americas who, by the European standards, are not civilized. So speaking about civilization or civilizing, another cultural motive is going to be the desire to spread Christianity / the civilizing mission. And that idea is that they would be civilizing non-Europeans by teaching them Christianity and European behavior expectations. A lot of this also goes with the pictures on the side of the PowerPoint, as you see here. These pictures depict the white man's burden. And this was a concept made in this time period, 1750 to 1900, to say that people of color, non-Europeans, needed to be parented by white people. So it's kind of the white man's burden to help support the people of color of the world. That is essentially what that idea, that concept is of. So next we're going to talk about state expansion, so the growing imperialist countries growing in colonization. So in this time period, we are going to see Spain and Portugal actually decline in influence, because at one point in the 1500s and the 1600s, they did have a lot of political and economic influence, and that is because of Christopher Columbus coming over in the 1400s, and then Spain and Portugal both being able to colonize majority of Mesoamerica and South America. But we will see in this time period, as a lot of those states also gain independence in this time, their influence will decline. But with their influence declining, there will be new powers rising. So it will be Britain, France, the United States, Japan, and then Germany. I don't know if I said that twice, but if I did, my apologies. And then this picture to the side is just a map of the world, and it shows the different imperial powers, so the American Empire, British, French, etc., and the different places that they claimed across the world in this time period as their colonies and as their mother country. So there are several different methods for conquest for imperialism. The three that we're going to be focusing on is warfare, so straight up violence, military versus military, whoever wins takes over. There's also going to be diplomacy, so this is typically very peaceful. It comes to an agreement, either based on trade, so economics, or political agreements. An example of this in this time period is going to be how Europe imperialized Africa, and that is going to be through the Berlin Conference. They're going to essentially divide up Africa into all these different states and regions for then European countries to then claim as their own. This in history is referred to the Scramble of Africa. The reason why these European imperialist countries want to take over Africa is due to the abundance, which means a huge ton amount of resources that Africa has at their disposal. And then very lastly, for methods of conquest, that is going to be land/empire expansion. And simply all that really means is the conquering of neighboring territories, so like land that is connected or like right next to that state. A good example is going to be both the United States and Japan. The United States, under the idea of manifest destiny, is going to expand past the 13 colonies, creating the United States of what we know today that goes from the East Coast to the West Coast, so like New York to California, through that idea that Americans were given the God-given right to expand the United States. Japan is going to also expand into neighboring territories. Specifically, Japan will conquer Korea, which of course will be a little hard because Japan is an island and they have to make their way to the mainland to conquer Korea. But it will not be hard for Japan, as Japan will now become an imperialist power due to the conquering of Korea. And soon we will see that they will invade China as well. There's 3 different kinds of colonies. That is going to be colonies that are direct conquest or negotiated takeover. This is very similar to like the warfare methods of conquest. The second kind of colony is going to be the transfer of control from businesses to European governments. We're going to see this in India with the British East India Company. This is going to be sold to Britain. That's how they get their name, British East. And then Britain will take over a lot of India through that company. And then through that company, Britain is able to influence political decisions and policies that are made, which will impact the economy. And then very lastly is settler colonies. These are different because this is when Europeans will purposefully locate to a new area in that colony. So for example, New Zealand, Australia, and then South Africa. Those are a few examples of settler colonies in this time period. With that, effects of imperialism, we will begin to see people resisting against imperialism, and that is because of this historical continuity, this idea that people within and outside of empires that are expanding will always show some kind of resistance. Could be small, could be little, but they will be met by an act of resistance of some kind. So there's going to be a few different factors for the resistance to imperialism. The external factors, of course, is just going to be the existence of imperialism, both economic and political imperialism, which we will be talking more about economic imperialism in this next Screencastify video. But with internal factors, which is really the most important factors in terms of influencing resistance towards imperialism, that is going to be religion and nationalism, both concepts that we have talked about in this class before. So here's a bunch of examples of direct resistance to empires expanding. That is going to be the Indian Rebellion of 1857. This is going to be against British rule. It will start as a mutiny, which means like an uprising of Hindu and Muslim soldiers that will go against the British government. They will not win this rebellion, unfortunately. Next is the Philippine Revolution, which is like the second picture underneath this painting. This revolution is going to take about 40 years or so later. In 1896, it is going to be the Philippines against Spanish rule. There will just be constant colonial, like imperial colonial revolutions that will occur after the United States will take control of the Philippines after the Spanish-American War. Next is the Maori Wars. This is happening in New Zealand. We talked about this in Unit 5. This is happening in the 1840s. It's going to take place over about 300 years. Not 300, oh my goodness. 30 years. I'm out of it. With that, it is going to be against the indigenous tribe of the Maori people versus the British government. Why this all occurs is because as British colonialists are moving into New Zealand, they will start taking over Maori land. The British government will enter an agreement with the Maori and give the Maori land to live on. But the Europeans, the British, will continue to take over the Maori lands, eventually causing the Maori to have to engage in war with Britain to protect the land that they were given by the British government themselves. And then very lastly, is going to be rebellions led by two separate people. The first one is going to be in West Africa. This one is with Samori Touré. He is resisting French and British rule in West Africa. He joins together a lot of different states in Africa, specifically West Africa, of course. And then in Peru, there's going to be the rebellion of Tupac Amaru. I'm so sorry if I pronounced that wrong. This is going to be against Spanish rule specifically. It's going to take place over 3 years or so. With that, we are going to see also resistance to established rule in both violent and then non-violent movements. So the first non-violent movement that we will see in this period will be the Indigenous Peoples movement of Ghost Dance. This is going to be against the United States. Overall, this is just a peaceful movement intended for Indigenous groups to really live a world and experience a moment where they aren't under the weight of the United States government and under the United States' societal expectations in terms of what makes you happy and all of those things. So with that, here is a video of the Indigenous groups Ghost Dance. We'll just watch a little clip of it. And really, this dance is an act of rebellion against the government because for a really long time, especially in this time period, in some places, you were not allowed to express your culture.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress.
And Indigenous groups were consistently demeaned. So, the expression of one's culture very, freely and happily is an act of resistance. Next is going to be the Greek War for Independence from the Ottoman Empire. We'll talk more about that with this next slide. This next slide is with the resistance to imperialism. We are going to see the establishment of new states, starting with the Zulu Kingdom. This is going to happen in South Africa. And then Balkan independence, which includes Greece, from the Ottoman Empire in this time period. With religion-inspired resistance, a lot of this is going to take place in Africa. All the examples that I have are from Africa. We're going to see the Koja cattle killing movement, where up to 400,000 cows were killed in this area because the people believed that their cows were getting sick and not producing milk due to the Europeans coming over and imperializing Africa. And so they believe that if they killed 400,000 cows, or if they sacrificed that many cows, the Europeans would leave and then prosperity will be brought back to their land. This did not happen. What happened was a lot of famine and starvation, unfortunately, because they did kill their food source. Next is going to be the Sokoto Caliphate. This is going to be in modern-day Nigeria. This is an Islamic state formed to purify society based on European influence in Africa. The next is the Mahdist Wars. These are taking place in Sudan, and these are specifically fighting against Christian rule in Africa. All right, we are on about like the last topic or so in this lecture for today. Now we're going to be talking about migration. Migration is going to be an impact of imperialism, so that is why it is included in this lecture. So environmental factors that contributes to migration or causes migration is going to be the industrial era, which is the migration for work purposes. That also leans into like economic factors. But with that, going back into environmental factors, a really big challenge for populations is going to be famine and poverty. So famines is like a very deep lack of food, and like food capacity is not able to feed the population. So with famines, people starve to death. So there will be a decrease in population. And then with poverty, there is always going to be a decrease in population, because when you are in poverty, you are more likely to have sicknesses because you do not have the resources to treat and be like proactive about your health. And then another environmental factor is going to be transportation. While transportation can be considered technical, it is also considered environmental because it is the way that humans are interacting with the environment. That is going to be railroads, steamships, also trains. They're going to make migration over long distances a lot easier and return from those places a lot easier as well. And then the economic factors, as I said with the last slide, really it is choosing to move or migrate for the purpose of getting a job or getting a higher wage. An example includes the British technical experts that moved to Argentina during this time period. Another example is going to be like this poster on the side of the slideshow. This depicts a Japanese man pointing to Brazil on a map of South America, and the Japanese like loosely translates to "we need to go there to find work." And really this was a propaganda poster, or like a way to encourage Japanese citizens to move to Brazil, move to South America to get job opportunities there. Next is going to be economic factors once more. That is the usage of coerced labor. So what's exciting about this time period is that we will eventually see the total abolishment of chattel slavery. That will happen in the late 19th century, which really just means the 1800s. A big reason why this will be abolished, specifically in the United States, will be the Civil War that occurs during this time period. With chattel slavery really across the board being abolished in most places by the late 1800s, there will be an increase in indentured servitude. And this is because these immigrants are just trying to migrate to either pay off their debt, or they're migrating to like get a new life, and to get a new life, they have to pay off their debts back home. And that is through indentured servitude for however long they sign to. In addition to indentured servitude, there will be Asian contract labor. This will mostly be taking place in Southeast Asia and the Caribbean. Very lastly is going to be penal communities, not communities, colonies. This is going to happen in Australia. And in penal colonies, prisoners are essentially, so people who are sentenced to jail, people who are sentenced to prison who are found guilty of a crime, are forced to work in a colony for however long their sentence is in jail, in prison. So that is this little drawing on the side of the PowerPoint that depicts a chain gang, which is like a group of convicts chained together doing some kind of work outside. So the effects of migration are going to be pretty major, depending on how many men leave that society that like they are moving from. And I say this because women's status will change. There will be an increase in responsibility for women, and there will be an increase or like a change in status of women. This is all just because of how many men are migrating and leaving for work. So in those cases, women are essentially replacing the men in their lives and in society who once lived in that area. So that's why there will be a gaining of responsibility and status. Another effect is going to be the existence of ethnic enclaves. We see a lot of these in the United States. I'm specifically thinking about even like in Detroit and Chicago, places where I've lived, there's a lot of different ethnic enclaves. And what those are neighborhoods of populations made up of migrants from the same areas. So there will be a lot of ethnic enclaves made up of the Chinese, Indians, as well as the Irish. There'll also be some ethnic enclaves of Hispanic and Latino populations. So for example, in Chicago, there are a lot of Irish enclaves or Irish neighborhoods. There are a few Chinese neighborhoods like Chinatown, for example. In Detroit, even where I'm from and where I've like been in and out of, there is like Mexican town where there is just like a bunch of Mexican restaurants, Mexican shops. And that is where a lot of Hispanic people, specifically Mexicans, move to when they move to Michigan. And then very lastly, for effects of migration, that is going to be exclusion or attempts of exclusion done by states. And with exclusion, what that is, it really is just attempts by the government to control or regulate immigration in their state, in their country. It's really in response to assumed cultural economic threats. And the reason why I emphasize assumed is because there is no guarantee that there will be cultural or economic threats by migrants coming in or immigrants coming in. There's never that guarantee. But it is assumed because this assumption comes from racist / xenophobic beliefs of fear of people of color integrating, or like not even just people of color, but people who are different from you integrating into that society. There's 2 examples of this that we're covering in this lecture, in this time period, and that is going to be the Chinese Exclusion Act in the United States that happens in the 1800s. In this Exclusion Act, it denies a certain amount of Chinese people from entering the United States. There was like very few were able to come into the United States, and they had to meet a lot of specific requirements for it that was really hard to meet. And then very lastly, for examples, is going to be the White Australian Party or the White Australia Party, policy that occurred. So with that, you can go ahead and complete your Google form to receive partial credit for this mastery assignment. Remember, you are to complete the guided notes. Those are worth 15 points. Then the Google form is worth 10 points. I will collect both May 16th to add up to your score of 25 for this lecture. Great job. I hope that you understood this lecture. If you have any questions for me, if you want to know any way to extend your learning, please let me know. If you have anything to say, I don't know, just email me, let me know. I hope you're doing well. If there's anything I can do to support you guys in this time, let me know.